at the Birds for being difficult. Did relationships and chemistry between the guys improve after that night as you continued to work together on the Bash tour? Were there any residual hard feelings when you encountered Hayes and Garvin later, such as when you and Hayes were involved in the WWF together in the 90s, or did parties involved patch things up?
Oh, God. Well, I don't even know if Michael remembered the 80s by the 90s. No, when we saw them, they started selling for us a little bit more. And especially, Gordy was never a problem anyway. And we had Dr. Death on our side, and Gordy, they were a great team themselves. So Gordy wasn't going to get in the middle of all that. So what's Hayes and Garvin going to do? They're going to be nice to the side that Dr. Death was on. They probably didn't like it. They still thought they should have been, a lot bigger stars than what they were. And I want to give all proper credit to the fabulous Freebirds of Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, and Buddy Roberts for being an innovative and revolutionary tag team and huge box office attractions and incredibly entertaining to watch and having great matches from the time they got together in 1979 all the way through the time that they pretty much split up whenever the last time was, late 80s. But Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin weren't the fucking Freebirds. Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin were two guys that liked to ride together and like to hang out together. And Michael Hayes needed a Freebird because Terry wasn't full-time and Buddy was out of the business. And that's why Jimmy Garvin became a Freebird. They weren't the Freebirds. They didn't draw like the Freebirds. They didn't work like the Freebirds. They didn't act like the Freebird. Well, they acted like Freebirds out of the ring. But anyway, so Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin, I'm sorry, weren't fucking Freebirds. Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin was much better with Precious as his own, as a fucking flamboyant fucking loudmouth heel instead of trying to be a fucking tough guy, fabulous Freebird from Bad Street. Because it didn't work.
Our next question is from Chris, Mr. Cornette, and Mrs. Radley. We often hear about jerks in wrestling, and this is something I think we've probably covered before, but I think it's fun to bring up again.
Jerks?
No, quite the opposite. Can you give stories of a few living wrestlers that are great people? Besides Bobby Eaton, of course. We all know nobody can say a bad word about him. It makes me feel bad when I hear how great and respected Owen Hart, Hildebrand, Brad Armstrong were after they passed. Please give a few stories about others that no one can say a bad word about them.
Oh, gosh. Well, and Mick Foley,
Sure.
Actually, I think the only bad thing that I've ever heard or even said about Mick, I think I'm the one who said it, is that he's too nice to be in the wrestling business. That's the worst thing I can say about Mick Foley. Bobby Fulton, I just think is just a fantastic person. And I'm sure there's probably people that have heat with him because he's run shows. He's promoted his own shows, but I love Bobby to death.
Somebody that we've had on the show many times, Lance Storm.
Lance, I don't think
man.
Lance has any heat with anybody.
Lance Russell for another Lance.
I was right there, a national treasure that we had in Charlotte. And also sometimes now this is subjective. It's like art. Who's a nice guy and who's not. I think, Tommy Young is a persnickety bus budget, but he's nice in his own way. So you branch out, but
Uncle Les
Thatcher. And I'm sure he also has a lot of heat because he ran a wrestling school for 75 years. So there's probably a lot of people go, that fucking Les Thatcher, he chewed me out, but at the same time, a nicer, more gracious person that you could not encounter. So it's why are we, the people that everybody universally agrees on, like Bobby Eaton is held up. Anytime somebody says the nice guy in wrestling, it's Bobby Eaton. And he is, because nobody has anything bad to say about Bobby. But many fans have been severely upset with him at times. So, I hate to start mentioning people's names because then everybody I leave out goes, what, he thinks I'm a fucking prick.
I can think we can throw in a couple ladies. Lisa Marie Varon. Wow, she's nice.
There you go. Well, she's a female Mick Foley. She likes everybody. She's so nice. Yeah. She's just too nice.
Molly Holly. I've heard nothing but amazing stuff about her. Just super, super giving. I mean, I think she paid for Beth Phoenix's wrestling school. Secretly.
As a matter of fact, now you've outed it. No, but I know it's been told, but yeah. She did. And, most of the girls also, that became wrestlers and then became divas, they're the nice ones. The wrestlers that go straight to divas, sometimes they're the ones you hear bad things about.
Yeah. All right. Our next question has no asker or no signatory here, but I do believe he just retired entirely from broadcasting. Why is Dave Brown so underrated as an announcer?
Because he was sitting next to Lance Russell. That's like, when in Charlotte they inducted Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood into the Hall of Heroes, and I remarked at one of the Q&As, I said, Jay Youngblood suffered from, Ricky disease like Robert Gibson. They were both such great performers on their own, but then they had this guy, partner named Ricky that was just above and beyond, worlds ahead of what everybody was doing. But then Ricky Steamboat mentioned that Jay Youngblood really taught him how to sell, because Jay was second-generation wrestler. Ricky Romero was his father, huge baby face in West Texas. So, and his brothers, Mark and Chris, were there, and they were both wrestlers. And Youngblood had that incredible ability to sell, and Ricky mentioned how he sold using his hands and his fingers to convey the pain. So, you can always learn something from somebody, but when somebody stands out, back to the question, like Lance, and was the one that, attracted most of the attention. Dave was the guy, he was so good at what he did. He was smooth. He was non-confrontational with the talent. He was the local weatherman. He's been the most popular news personality on television in Memphis for 50 years. And he still was the wrestling announcer, and people bought it. And Dave Brown, he was so smooth. I patterned when I became a ring announcer when I was a teenager, just as fill-in for spot shows and everything. I announced like Dave Brown announced because he was the ring announcer for the TV program too. I give him it's a one fall with whatever time limit in this corner. Wait, hometown guy. Clear voice, make sure everybody understands it. He didn't have a gimmick. His gimmick was that he was a broadcaster talking about the wrestling program or giving the weather or whatever. And so it's almost like nobody realizes how good Dennis Condrey was, because he was partners with Bobby Eaton, but he didn't do anything incredibly flashy. He just did everything well. Dave wasn't really flashy. He just did everything well.
What that kind of reminds me of is they always say when I used to watch football that the best referees are the ones you don't notice.
Yeah.
They kind of sort of melt into the background, but they're doing their job. If you actually start to notice a referee, something has gone wrong, and maybe that's one of these examples. You didn't quite notice because he was doing it so perfectly.
That's the thing is you listened, you believed everything that Lance and Dave said. Why wouldn't you? They were the most credible people on television, because the promotion, they never were made to look stupid or foolish or like they didn't know what they were talking about or told not to say certain words, or they didn't talk down to the audience. They didn't overplay it and respond with too much indignation to the heels, or they didn't cheerlead the baby faces and try to really be baby faces themselves. But they had the hope in their voice that, the right guy would win, and the disappointment when he didn't. It worked. And, once again, Dave Brown, Lance put him on the air. He was in radio, and Lance was a program director and programming executive at WHBQ, and picked Dave not only to co-host the wrestling show with him, but then later on he got a chance to put him on the news as a weatherman. And the guy's been doing it for 45 years, I think it was. He's been on the air in Memphis for 50, I think, doing the weather for 45 or whatever. But point is, he's one of the most recognizable faces in the city of Memphis, and everybody knew who he was originally through the wrestling program, and it hasn't nobody laughs at him because he was involved in wrestling. He's not taken as a clown or any less, and it didn't hurt the business, certainly, because he did a good job at it. It shows that it can work. You can actually take people on wrestling seriously if they're presented as such over a long period of time and do a good job at it.
Well, imagine that.
Imagine that.
Our next question is from Drew from Springfield, Missouri, now living in Manchester, England. Now, he's trying to get 2 questions for the price of 1. But
he comes from 2 places, so.
True. All right. Hello, Jim. I've got a couple questions for you, but both are unrelated. Sorry. Firstly, a few years ago when Charlie Haas was in Ring of Honor, he was developing a really enjoyable heel character. Haas left ROH shortly after this After a house show, some reports said he gave a bizarre drunken farewell speech. What was behind his retirement from wrestling? And any thoughts on the ROH wrestler Cheeseburger at that time who worked with Haas briefly?
I was gone by that point, so I didn't see the Cheeseburger and Charlie stuff, but Charlie basically got where I got at one point. He was just fed up with fucking wrestling, fed up with fucking traveling, and had some people stir him fucking up and piss him off, and just decided enough was enough. And he went home, and he didn't. I don't think he read, because a lot of people don't know this. It's not like he's just sitting there waiting for people to fucking call him and book him. He has a full-time job in sales in Texas, and he has 5 kids, so he has other things going on.
When I was living in Plano, he was actually running a shop in the next town over, Frisco. I think it was like a sports drink kind of place, smoothie place.
Well, and actually he has, and I don't know which he's doing first, either that and now this, or this and now that, but he was also working in sales, where he was doing a little bit of traveling also, and for some office supply, but whatever. Regardless, he got fed the fuck up with wrestling and traveling and people tripping his trigger, and probably if I had been there that night, things would not have gone as far or as public as they went, but somebody fucked with him, and he proved that he was not a person at that point in time to be fucked with. As Dennis Condrey would say, as he sat there, right then, he did not give a fuck. and had to fucking, and basically, well, I guess everybody's heard the story. Grizzly Redwood, who there'd been some issues with, because everybody liked Grizzly, and Grizzly was a nice kid in Ring of Honor. And he was a good guy, and he was loyal and dedicated, and etc. But everybody wanted to sell for him. And Charlie Haas, at an all-American wrestler at 6'2" and 250 something pounds, and fucking hard as a rock, and wanting to get over and draw money, was not going to sell in this little short match they were going to do for Grizzly Redwood, who was 5'6" and 140 pounds. And it wasn't going to happen, and I would have never allowed it to fucking happen. And I actually had issues with people who did it, like Michael Elgin, who we were trying to get over as a killer, and fucking sold for Grizzly Redwood on TV. Anyway, there had been some bad feelings there or whatever. So Grizzly somehow, in some alternate universe, thought it would be a good idea to grab Charlie Haas's cowboy hat, straw hat, whatever he had, and stomp on it in the locker room.
Oh, goodness.
And Charlie knocked him out. And that was Charlie's last night there. And he went home, and he didn't wrestle. He was like me. He went home and said, fuck it, and didn't do anything related to wrestling for a long time. And now I saw him, and we'll see him again WrestleMania weekend. Hello, Dallas, Fort Worth, the Metroplex. I'll be there for the IHWE WrestleMania weekend, but Charlie wrestles for the IHWE and a few other promotions when he feels like it, and still has his job and is not traveling as much, and still has a bunch of kids, and is happy. And Grizzly Redwood, as far as I know, is still unconscious.
His second question is, I am originally from Missouri, which has a rich history of wrestling. Can you give your thoughts on Missouri wrestling and share any good stories other than the Midnight Express's trip to Kansas City to wrestle Bob Brower and Marty Jannetty?
Well, but now on the other end of the spectrum and on the other end of the state, you have St. Louis. And really, when everybody thinks about wrestling in Missouri, they think of St. Louis and Sam Muchnick and the Kiel Auditorium and the seat of the NWA and the place where so many historic matches happen, and the world title changed hands more often there over the 20th century than probably anywhere else in the country. And it was the seat of power and the most respectable city for wrestling in North America. So that was, once again, there you go. There's the partner principle, because the Kansas City, somebody wrote me and said, hey, I hate every time you tell a story about Kansas City, it's like it's because it was Poverty Row. And I loved watching Central States wrestling when I was a kid. Was there a time where the guys ever liked wrestling in Kansas City? And yes, it was a territory. It wasn't a big money territory, but some guys liked it. Some guys lived there. Some guys moved there, and they did do decent business at some points, but they were, next to and the sister city of St. Louis. And the Kansas City guys that were in the main events would go to St. Louis, and they'd be in a second match. and it was like the Mercy, booking for the Kansas City territory to work underneath on the Kiel Auditorium shows that had every major star in the country at one time or another on the card. So, maybe they looked worse in comparison because across the state this is how you run a local wrestling promotion. It's still the blueprint. It's the most successful over time and for its press